Dear listener, welcome to the Hercule Poirot Story Podcast, where the little grey cells unravel the most perplexing enigmas of human folly. Tonight, we transport you to the quaint village of Juniper Orchard, nestled in the verdant hills of the English countryside during the shadowed years of the 1930s. Here, amid the ancient orchards heavy with autumnal fruit and the winding cobblestone paths veiled in perpetual fog, a most insidious crime has unfolded. The air hangs thick with the scent of damp earth and unspoken secrets, as storm clouds gather over the thatched roofs, portending doom. Join us in this tale of deception and deduction. If the twists intrigue you, do subscribe and share your thoughts, perhaps even your own suspicions, in the comments below. And now, let the mystery commence. Chapter 1. The Serene Facade of Juniper Orchard. In the sleepy hamlet of Juniper Orchard, where the river Juniper meandered lazily through meadows dotted with gnarled apple trees heavy laden with the bounty of autumn, life proceeded with the unhurried rhythm of a bygone era. It was the autumn of 1932, a time when the tendrils of the Great Depression had begun to insinuate themselves even into the most idyllic corners of the English countryside, casting a subtle pall over the verdant landscapes and the sturdy thatched cottages that clustered like watchful sentinels along the winding cobblestone lanes. Yet, the villagers of Juniper Orchard clung to their traditions with a stoic resolve, their days governed by the tolling of the ancient church bell and the seasonal cycles of planting and harvest. The air was redolent with the earthy perfume of fallen leaves and ripening fruit, mingled with the faint, acrid tang of wood smoke from chimneys that puffed lazily into the crisp morning sky. At the heart of this bucolic enclave stood the modest post office, a squat edifice of weathered stone, its walls entwined with rampant ivy that seemed to whisper secrets to the wind. The building, with its mullioned windows and a faded sign creaking gently above the door, served not merely as a conduit for letters and parcels, but as the veritable nerve centre of village life. Here, gossip was exchanged as freely as stamps were affixed, and the comings and goings of the inhabitants were noted with the precision of a well-kept ledger. Presiding over this domain was Miss Agatha Thorne, the postmistress, a woman whose presence was as integral to Juniper Orchard as the ancient oaks that bordered, reminiscent of a winter sky, missed naught. They darted with the acuity of a hawk surveying its domain, absorbing every nuance of expression, every furtive glance exchanged over the counter. She favoured sensible woolen dresses in muted tones of grey and navy, adorned invariably with a brooch of antique silver, a heirloom, it was whispered, from a long-lost suitor whose memory she guarded with jealous fervour. Psychologically, Miss Thorne was a paragon of efficiency, her mind a meticulously organised repository of village law, postal regulations, and the myriad secrets that letters so often betrayed. Yet, beneath this composed exterior lurked a profound vulnerability, a quiet longing for companionship that she masked with an acerbic wit and a veneer of aloofness. She had never married, and the villagers speculated in hushed tones about the reasons. A broken heart, perhaps, or a dedication to her duties that brooked no distractions. Whatever the truth, Miss Thorne's solitude was her armour, and she wielded it with the precision of a fencer parrying unwelcome intrusions. On this fateful morning, as a diaphanous fog rolled in from the surrounding orchards, veiling the landscape in a shroud of mystery, Miss Thorne arrived at her post with the punctuality of the village clock striking 8. She unlocked the heavy oak door with a key that jangled softly on its chain, stepping into the familiar confines where the scent of ink and sealing wax mingled with the faint aroma of lavender from her personal sachet. The interior was a model of order, rows of pigeonholes stuffed with envelopes, a gleaming brass scale for weighing parcels, and a counter polished to a high sheen by years of transactions. She set about her routine with methodical grace, sorting the incoming mail, affixing stamps to outgoing missives, and preparing the ledger for the day's accounts. The bell above the door tinkled merrily with each entrant, a cheerful counterpoint to the gathering mist outside. The first to cross the threshold was Dr. Reginald Hawthorne, the village physician, a burly man of some 50 years whose ruddy complexion spoke of hearty meals and perhaps an over-fondness for port. His spectacles perched precariously on a bulbous nose, and his tweed jacket strained slightly at the seams, betraying a frame more accustomed to the comforts of his study than the rigours. "Morning, Miss Thorne," he boomed, his voice echoing in the small space like a distant thunderclap. "A fine mist we have today. Keeps the lungs moist, I always say. Any post for me?" Miss Thorne inclined her head slightly, her lips curving into a polite but reserved smile. "Indeed, Doctor. A letter from London, your sister, I believe, and a parcel from the apothecary." She handed over the items with efficient poise, her fingers brushing the envelope as if committing its details to memory. Inwardly, she pondered the doctor's flushed cheeks, wondering if his latest venture at the cards had proven fruitful or folly. Dr. Hawthorne, for his part, felt the weight of her gaze, a subtle reminder of the secrets she held, and he departed with a hasty nod, clutching his mail as if it were a talisman against misfortune. Scarcely had the door closed behind him when it swung open again, admitting Mrs. Eliza Pembroke, the spinster schoolmistress whose gaunt figure cut a stark silhouette against the foggy backdrop. At 8:40, Mrs. Pembroke possessed a mousy crop of hair streaked with grey, pulled back into a severe bun that accentuated her perpetual scowl. Her dresses were invariably drab, high-necked affairs in shades of brown, and her thin lips were set in a line of habitual disapproval. Physically unremarkable, save for the sharpness of her features that lent her an almost predatory aspect, she moved with the deliberate steps of one who measured life in precise increments. Psychologically, Mrs. Pembroke was a cauldron of repressed envy, her heart embittered by years of solitude and perceived slights. She harboured a jealous resentment toward any who enjoyed what she deemed undeserved happiness, her mind a labyrinth of grudges nursed in the quiet hours after her pupils had departed. "Morning, Agatha," she said curtly, foregoing the formalities with a familiarity that bordered on presumption. "Stamps, if you please, 10 of the penny ones. And has that periodical arrived? The one on educational reforms?" Miss Thorne arched an eyebrow, her voice cool as the autumn breeze. "It has, Mrs. Pembroke, though I must say, the article on progressive methods seems rather radical for our little village." She slid the magazine across the counter, along with the stamps, observing the flicker of irritation in the schoolmistress's eyes. Mrs. Pembroke snatched the items, delivering mail to outlying farms. Psychologically, he was driven by an ambitious streak that whispered incessantly of escaping the village's stifling confines, his mind ablaze with dreams of city lights and grander horizons. Yet, beneath this restlessness lay a core of loyalty, tempered by a subtle cunning that he employed to navigate the intricacies of village politics. "Miss Thorne, ma'am," he greeted with a boyish grin, tipping his cap. "The bags are ready for sorting. Anything special today?" She regarded him with a maternal fondness, though her eyes held a trace of scrutiny. "The usual, Timothy, but mind the fog, it's thickening, and do deliver that urgent wire to the squire promptly." As he set about his tasks, whistling softly, Miss Thorne reflected on his potential, unaware that his ambitions might one day entangle him in webs of his own weaving. The morning wore on, punctuated by the arrivals of other villagers. Squire Harold Beaumont, the local landowner, blustered in like a gale, his portly frame of 60 years clad in hunting tweeds that strained against his florid girth. With a booming voice that rattled the windows and a face perpetually flushed from exertion or indignation, the squire embodied the archetype of rural gentry. Physically imposing, with a shock of white hair and a moustache that bristled like a hedgehog, he moved with the ponderous authority of one accustomed to deference. Psychologically, his avarice for expanding his estates knew no bounds, a greed that masked a deeper insecurity born of dwindling fortunes in these trying economic times. "Thorne, that parcel from the solicitors, has it come?" he demanded, pounding the counter with a meaty fist. "It has, squire," she replied evenly, producing the item with unflappable calm. As he departed, grumbling about boundary disputes, Miss Thorne noted the tremor in his hand, a sign, perhaps, of the pressures weighing upon him. Last among the morning's visitors was Miss Victoria Slade, the enigmatic newcomer who had taken up residence in a quaint cottage on the village outskirts only months prior. a striking beauty of 30, with raven hair cascading in elegant waves, and almond-shaped eyes that held the allure of distant mysteries. Miss Slade dressed in fashions that whispered of London sophistication. Silk blouses and tailored curiosity piqued by the cryptic message scrawled upon it. As Miss Slade glided out, the fog seemed to part briefly, only to close in again, thicker than before. By mid-morning, the post office hummed with the quiet efficiency that defined Miss Thorne's domain. Yet, as the mist deepened outside, cloaking the orchards in an impenetrable veil, an undercurrent of unease stirred within her. She paused in her sorting, gazing out the window where the ancient trees loomed like spectral guardians. Little did she know that this serene facade concealed currents of deception, envy, and hidden malice that would soon erupt, shattering the tranquility of Juniper Orchard forever. The bell tinkled once more, but this time it carried an omen of the storm to come. Chapter 2. The Empty Counter. As the clock in the village square struck midday, its resonant chimes carried across the fog-enshrouded lanes of Juniper Orchard like a solemn proclamation. The post office bell, which had tinkled with such merry insistence throughout the morning, fell ominously silent. The mist had thickened into a palpable veil, muffling the distant lowing of cattle in the meadows and lending an ethereal quality to the thatched roofs that peeked through the haze. Inside the post office, the air hung heavy, undisturbed save for the faint ticking of a wall clock and the occasional drip from a leaky eave outside. Timothy Lark, the young postboy, returned from his morning rounds, his bicycle wheels crunching over the gravel path that led to the rear entrance. His cheeks were flushed from the exertion, and beads of moisture clung to his tousled blonde locks, courtesy of the pervasive dampness that seemed to seep into every crevice of the village. Pushing open the door with a habitual shove, Timothy stepped inside, expecting the familiar sight of Miss Agatha Thorne bent over her ledger, her sharp blue eyes lifting to greet him with that mixture of maternal affection and stern appraisal. Instead, he was met with an unnerving void. The counter stood deserted, a tableau of disarray that sent a chill racing down his spine. Parcels lay scattered haphazardly across the polished surface, some teetering precariously on the edge as if abandoned in mid-motion. A delicate china teacup, one of Miss Thorne's prized possessions, adorned with beneath his earnest facade. He ventured behind the counter, a territory he seldom breached without invitation. His green eyes darted about, cataloguing the anomalies with a keenness honed by years of observing the postmistress's precise habits. There, caught on a protruding nail near the rear door, fluttered a torn scrap of fabric, silk, of an emerald green hue that shimmered faintly in the dim light filtering through the mullioned windows. It was incongruous, for Miss Thorne favoured muted tones. This vibrant shred spoke of someone else's attire, perhaps ripped in haste or struggle. Further inspection revealed footprints marring the dusty floorboards, a chaotic dance of impressions that told a tale of intrusion. One set was small and feminine, the neat imprints of sensible heels that matched Miss Thorne's own, yet they appeared erratic, as if she had been propelled backward. Intermingled were larger marks, perhaps masculine, with the broad tread of boots that suggested a heavier frame, leading inexorably toward the rear door that opened onto the shadowy expanse of the orchard beyond. The air here was redolent with Miss Thorne's signature lavender perfume, a soothing floral note that she applied sparingly each morning. But now it mingled with something acrid, a sharp undercurrent that prickled at Timothy's nostrils. Fear, perhaps, or the metallic tang of adrenaline. His mind raced, piecing together fragments. Had she been taken, or had she fled? The ambitious streak within him, that whispered of greater destinies beyond the village's confines, now twisted into a knot of anxiety. For Miss Thorne had been more than an employer, she was a mentor, and her promised small inheritance loomed in his thoughts like a distant beacon. Unable to contain his alarm, Timothy burst from the post office, his cries shattering the midday hush. "Help! Miss Thorne! She's gone! Something's amiss!" His voice carried through the fog, reaching the ears of villagers going about their noontide errands. Word spread like wildfire through Juniper Orchard, igniting a flurry of activity that belied the hamlet's usual somnolence. Doors creaked open, faces peered from windows, and soon a small crowd gathered at the post office threshold, their murmurs a rising crescendo of speculation and concern. First to arrive was letters from creditors that detailed his mounting gambling debts. Those missives, with their insistent demands for repayment, had been a sword of Damocles over his head. She had held them in confidence, but with a subtle leverage that gnawed at his pride. As he surveyed the disarray, the overturned cup, the scattered parcels, a flicker of opportunistic relief mingled with his worry. If she were truly vanished, perhaps those incriminating documents would vanish with her. Close on his heels came Mrs. Eliza Pembroke, the spinster schoolmistress, her gaunt figure weaving through the crowd with the determination of a weasel scenting prey. Her mousy hair was dishevelled from a hasty departure from her classroom, and her perpetual scowl deepened as she clucked her tongue in disapproval. "What are to do? Such inefficiency. Typical, really," she muttered, though secretly a thrill of relish coursed through her embittered soul. Miss Thorne had once spurned her overtures of friendship, dismissing a proposed tea with a polite but cutting refusal that had stung like a slap. Mrs. Pembroke's psychological cauldron of repressed envy bubbled over at the disruption. Here was chaos in the domain of the woman who had always seemed so unflappably composed, a small vengeance for years of perceived slights. Squire Harold Beaumont blustered in next, his portly form puffing with indignation as he elbowed his way forward. "What's all this nonsense? Can't a man collect his mail without pandemonium?" he thundered, his florid face reddening further under his bristling moustache. Yet, as he took in the empty counter, his bluster masked a recollection of a recent heated argument with Miss Thorne over a disputed parcel of land, a boundary map she had refused to expedite, citing procedural delays that he suspected were deliberate obstructions to his avaricious expansions. His greed, that insatiable hunger for more acres, now twisted into unease. What if she had uncovered more about his dubious dealings? Miss Victoria Slade arrived last among the principals, her striking beauty pale and composed amid the gathering throng. Her raven hair was neatly pinned, and her almond-shaped eyes scanned the scene with a detachment that bordered on eerie. She offered no comment, her velvet voice silent. But inwardly, her mind raced to buried secrets from her London days, scandals of the music hall that Miss Thorne transcended the constable's modest capabilities. Whispers turned to resolve. A telegram must be dispatched forthwith to a sharper intellect. Thus, in the post office's shadowed confines, a message was hastily composed and sent via the very wires Miss Thorne had so diligently maintained. Addressed to Hercule Poirot, the renowned Belgian detective who, by fortuitous circumstance, was visiting a nearby acquaintance in the county, it beseeched his aid in unravelling the vanishing. As the telegram winged its way, the fog outside seemed to thicken further, cloaking Juniper Orchard in a mantle of suspense, where every shadow held a secret, and every silence a clue. Chapter 3. The Arrival of the Little Belgian. The afternoon train from London chugged into Juniper Station, with a sigh of steam that mingled seamlessly with the persistent fog enveloping the platform, as if the locomotive itself were exhaling in sympathy with the shrouded landscape. It was a modest halt, little more than a weathered wooden shelter, flanked by overgrown hedgerows, where the rails curved gracefully through the countryside, like a silver thread stitching together patches of emerald meadow and russet orchard. The year 1932 had brought with it not only economic woes, but also an unseasonable chill, and on this day the mist clung tenaciously to the air, reducing visibility to a mere suggestion of shapes and forms. Amid this ethereal veil, a figure of singular distinction alighted from the first-class carriage. Hercule Poirot, the renowned Belgian detective, whose reputation for unravelling the most labyrinthine enigmas preceded him like a herald. Poirot was a man of diminutive stature, his compact frame clad in an impeccably tailored overcoat of fine wool, buttoned against the damp. His moustaches, those magnificent appendages that curled with mathematical precision, were waxed to a glossy perfection, defying the humidity with an almost defiant elegance. His head, egg-shaped and inclined at a precise angle that suggested perpetual contemplation, was topped by a Homburg hat of the finest felt. His eyes, a vivid green that pierced through the fog like emeralds in twilight, sparkled with the acuity of a predator surveying its terrain. Patent leather shoes, gleaming improbably despite the muddied paths that awaited, completed his ensemble. Bluff demeanour and military bearing, whose moustache, though respectable, was a mere shadow compared to Poirot's masterpiece. Hastings, with his fair hair streaked by the sun of colonial campaigns, and his tweed suit rumpled from the journey, served as a foil to Poirot's finesse. His psychology was that of the straightforward soldier, honest, loyal, and occasionally bewildered by the subtleties of deduction, his English sensibility providing a grounding counterpoint to Poirot's more flamboyant methods. "By Jove, Poirot!" Hastings exclaimed as they stepped onto the platform, his breath visible in the chill air. "This fog is thicker than pea soup. How on earth are we to find our way in this murk?" Poirot adjusted his gloves with a faint smile, his green eyes twinkling. "Ah, mon ami Hastings, the fog, it is but a metaphor for the mysteries of the human soul, obscuring, yet penetrable by the light of reason. We shall proceed to the post office forthwith. A carriage, perhaps?" As if summoned by his words, a horse-drawn trap emerged from the mist. Its driver, a grizzled local with a pipe clenched between his teeth, tipping his cap in recognition of the telegram's urgency. The pair climbed aboard, the vehicle creaking into motion along the rutted lane toward Juniper Orchard. As they jolted through the fog, Poirot murmured thoughtfully, "The vanishing of a postmistress, Hastings. It is no mere trifle. Letters, they are the veins of society, carrying the lifeblood of secrets, confessions, and betrayals. One such secret, I suspect, has proven fatal." The journey, though short, allowed Poirot's mind to whirl with anticipatory vigour. He envisioned the scene based on the terse telegram. An empty counter, signs of disturbance, a woman of authority spirited away in broad daylight. "Consider, mon ami," he continued, his voice a melodic cadence above the clip-clop of hooves. "Why a post office? It is the nexus of communication, where private worlds intersect. The culprit, he or she, must have known this intimately." Hastings nodded sagely, though his brow furrowed in confusion. "Dash it all, Poirot, it sounds like a ghost story. Vanished without a trace? In a village like this?" Upon arrival at the post office, the fog had lifted. Overturned teacup caught his eye first, the stain now dried into a mottled pattern on the blotter. "Observe, Hastings, the tea. It is spilled, yet not entirely consumed." She was interrupted mid-sip. He leaned closer, inhaling deeply. The lavender scent, Miss Thorne's signature, was overpowering, saturating the air as if deliberately amplified. "This perfume, it is too strong, no? As if applied to mask another odour, perhaps something more sinister." The torn scrap of emerald silk, still snagged on the nail, intrigued him profoundly. Poirot plucked it gingerly with tweezers from his pocket-case, holding it to the light. Silk, fine quality, not the attire of our postmistress, who favoured wool. A visitor's garment, ripped in struggle? Or planted to mislead? The footprints on the dusty floor drew him next, the feminine set, erratic and backward-leading, intertwined with broader masculine impressions that trailed to the rear door. A confrontation, yes, but no blood, no signs of violence beyond this disarray. Why no cry for help? The village is small, a scream would carry. As Poirot pieced together the timeline, drawing upon Timothy Lark's account relayed by the constable, clarity began to emerge amid the fog of uncertainty. Miss Thorne had been last seen at 11 o'clock by the postboy, who departed shortly thereafter on his rounds. By noon, upon his return, she was gone. The counter abandoned, the bell silent. 11 to noon, a mere hour, Poirot mused, his moustaches twitching. Yet in that window the deed was done. Inconsistencies abound. The lavender so dominant, the footprints too pristine, as if staged, and the rear door, leading to the orchard, where fog would conceal much. Hastings paced nearby, his military boots thudding softly. Sounds like abduction, Poirot, dragged off against her will. But Poirot shook his head, his green eyes narrowing. Perhaps, mon ami, but why not bind her? Why the tea left unfinished? No, this is calculated, a vanishing designed to perplex. He straightened, satisfaction gleaming in his gaze as his little grey cells stirred to life. The villagers watched from the doorway, their faces a mosaic of awe and apprehension. Dr. Hawthorne fidgeting with his spectacles, Mrs. Pembroke scowling in the shadows. Sins. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Orchard. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting elongated shadows across the gnarled trunks of the apple trees in Juniper Orchard, a palpable hush descended upon the village, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves stirred by a fitful breeze. The fog, which had clung tenaciously to the landscape throughout the day, now mingled with the encroaching dusk, transforming the orchards into a labyrinth of spectral forms, where visibility waned to mere whispers of outline. It was in this crepuscular realm, amid the heavy-laden boughs drooping under the weight of ripening fruit, that a gruesome discovery shattered the fragile veneer of tranquility that had persisted since Miss Agatha Thorne's inexplicable vanishing. A farmhand, venturing deeper into the orchard to retrieve a wayward tool, stumbled upon her lifeless form sprawled beneath an ancient tree, its branches arching like accusatory fingers toward the darkening sky. Miss Thorne's body lay in a posture of unnatural repose, her slender frame twisted slightly, as if in a final, futile attempt to ward off her assailant. Her neck bore the livid bruises of strangulation, purple welts that encircled her throat like a macabre necklace, suggestive of a silk scarf or similar ligature wielded with merciless force. Yet, no such weapon was discernible nearby. The ground around her was disturbed only by fallen leaves and the imprint of her own heels, as if she had thrashed briefly in the throes of asphyxiation. Clutched in her rigid right hand was a single apple, partially bitten, its crimson skin glistening with dew, or perhaps saliva, in the fading light. The fruit's presence struck an incongruous note, a symbol of the orchard's bounty turned sinister. Upon closer inspection, her lips exhibited a faint blue tinge, a cyanotic hue that hinted at a subtler toxin at play, perhaps administered prior to the fatal constriction, rendering her weakened and compliant. The method of death, thus, appeared a cunning amalgamation: poison to subdue, strangulation to ensure silence eternal. Word of the macabre find spread through Juniper Orchard with the rapidity of a contagion. Villagers converging upon the scene in a procession of lanterns that bobbed like will-o'-the-wisps through the mist, green eyes absorbing every detail under the flickering lantern light. Not broad daylight, mon ami. The deed likely occurred in the fog-shrouded hour post-vanishing. Observe the bruises, fresh, yet the body cools already. And this apple, bitten, but by whom? Her lips suggest cyanide, that insidious almond-scented harbinger of death, which would explain the cyanosis. He gestured to the surrounding earth, noting the absence of foreign footprints beyond those leading from the post office's rear door. The killer, he is clever, dragging her here to obscure the primary scene, perhaps to imply a natural demise amid the fruits. With the body respectfully covered and arrangements made for its removal to the village morgue, such as it was, a repurposed shed behind Dr. Hawthorne's surgery, Poirot commenced his interviews, electing to begin in the dim confines of the post office itself, where the air still hung heavy with lavender and unspoken suspicions. First summoned was young Timothy Lark, the postboy, whose lanky frame slouched into the room with the reluctance of a schoolboy called to the headmaster's study. His tousled blonde locks were dishevelled, and his earnest green eyes darted evasively, betraying the ambitious undercurrents that churned beneath his youthful facade. Physically agile, psychologically driven by dreams of escape, Timothy fidgeted with his cap as Poirot fixed him with a penetrating stare. "Monsieur Lark," Poirot began, his voice a silken thread weaving through the tension. "You were the last to see Mademoiselle Thorne alive, no? Recount, if you please, your morning interactions." Timothy stammered, his words tumbling forth in a rush. "Sir, I helped with the sorting, as always. She was kind to me, promised a small inheritance in her will, nothing grand, just enough to start anew, perhaps. But I admired her, that's all. No quarrels, I swear." Poirot noted the youth's darting gaze, a psychological tell of concealed anxiety. Yet a cursory comparison revealed that Timothy's boot prints matched none at the crime scenes, neither the post office floor nor the orchard soil. A motive simmered, inheritance, ambition, but the evidence absolved him, for now. Dismissed with a nod, Timothy departed, his shoulders sagging under the weight of scrutiny. Next entered Dr. Reginald Hawthorne, the village physician, vehemently, his voice rising in pitch, yet the admission slipped forth. She had known of his wages, the intercepted letters from bookmakers that detailed his spiralling losses. She held it over me, yes, but murder? Preposterous. His alibi, tending a patient at the far end of the village during the critical hour, held tentatively, though Poirot's little grey cells noted the tremor in his grasp. A sign of guilt, or merely nerves frayed by circumstance? As the interviews paused for a moment's respite, a red herring materialized from the shadows of village gossip. A grizzled old shepherd, lantern in hand, approached Poirot with wide-eyed fervour. "I saw it, sir. A shadowy figure, cloaked and hooded, fleeing the orchard round noon. Slipped into the mist like a wraith. This apparition, described with the embellishments of superstition, pointed suspicion toward the outsider, Miss Victoria Slade, whose enigmatic arrival and cosmopolitan airs had already fueled whispers of intrigue. Her raven hair and almond-shaped eyes, coupled with her unverifiable London past, made her a convenient scapegoat in the villagers' collective imagination. Poirot, however, arched an eyebrow skeptically. A cloak in fog? Convenient, no? But we shall see if this phantom has substance. The storm broke then, rain pattering against the post office windows like insistent fingers demanding entry. As Poirot pondered the emerging tapestry, the strangled neck, the poisoned apple, clues that whispered of premeditation, of a killer intimate with Miss Thorne's habits. Motives swirled like the mist. Inheritance for the ambitious youth, exposure for the indebted doctor, and now, this spectral misdirection toward the newcomer. Yet, deeper currents lurked. Revenge, secrets buried in letters, envy festering in solitary hearts. As lightning illuminated the orchard beyond, casting stark shadows, Poirot straightened his moustaches, his mind a whirlwind of deduction. The whispers in the orchard were not mere wind. They were the echoes of human malice, and he, Hercule Poirot, would amplify them until the truth resounded clear. Chapter 5. Shadows of Envy. The evening rain that had begun as a gentle patter during the discovery in the orchard now intensified into a relentless downpour, drumming against the slate roofs of Juniper Orchard with the insistence of an impatient boots leaving faint imprints on the floorboards, his bluff features creased with a mixture of fascination and discomfort at the Belgian's inscrutable process. Having dismissed Dr. Hawthorne with a courteous yet probing nod, Poirot summoned the next suspect, Mrs. Eliza Pembroke, the spinster schoolmistress whose gaunt silhouette cut through the doorway like a shadow elongated by the flickering candlelight. She entered with the deliberate tread of one accustomed to commanding a classroom of unruly pupils, her mousy hair plastered slightly by the rain, her high-necked dress of drab brown clinging damply to her angular frame. At 8:40, Mrs. Pembroke's features were etched with the lines of perpetual disapproval, her thin lips pursed in a habitual scowl that deepened the furrows around her mouth. Physically unassuming, with a posture rigid as a schoolroom ruler, she exuded an aura of austerity that masked the turbulent undercurrents of her psyche. Psychologically, she was a vessel brimming with repressed envy, her heart a repository of grudges nurtured in the solitude of her modest cottage, where evenings were spent poring over lesson plans laced with bitter reflections on the felicities denied her. "Madam Pembroke," Poirot greeted with his characteristic continental politeness, gesturing to a chair opposite the counter, where the overturned teacup still lay as a silent witness. His green eyes, sharp as cut emeralds, fixed upon her with an intensity that seemed to pierce the veils of her composure. "You were among the first to arrive upon the alarm of Mademoiselle Thorne's vanishing. Pray, recount your movements this morn." Mrs. Pembroke seated herself with a sniff, her hands folding primly in her lap, though her knuckles whitened with suppressed tension. "I called at the post office shortly after 8, as is my custom," she replied curtly, her voice laced with the clipped precision of a pedagogue. "Stamps and a periodical, nothing untoward." Agatha was her usual self, efficient, aloof. We exchanged few words. Poirot tilted his egg-shaped head, his moustaches twitching faintly as he absorbed her demeanour. "And your relations with the postmistress? Amicable, one presumes?" At this, a flicker of something darker crossed Mrs. Pembroke's scowling visage, a shadow of envy that Poirot's acute perception captured like a lens focusing on a hidden flaw. Hopes for. The postmistress's charm, her poised demeanour, had eclipsed the schoolmistress's more austere virtues, leaving a wound that time had only deepened into a motive ripe for malice. Poirot nodded sagely, his voice a soothing murmur amid the storm's crescendo. "Envy, madam. It is a shadow that lengthens in the absence of light. Did this bitterness manifest in actions? A confrontation, perhaps?" Mrs. Pembroke's eyes narrowed, her gaunt frame quivering with indignation. "Actions? I am no murderess, monsieur. But yes, we argued. Over trifles, letters delayed, parcels mishandled. She knew how to wound with her propriety." As she spoke, Poirot's mind catalogued the psychological clues, her repressed emotions, the patterns of behaviour that revealed a soul starved of warmth, turning inward to nurture grudges like poisonous vines. Yet her alibi held, teaching her class until the midday bell, corroborated by a dozen wide-eyed pupils. Dismissed for the moment, she rose stiffly, her scowl intact, but her departure carried the weight of unveiled shadows. With the interview concluded, Poirot ventured forth into the rain-lashed night, his overcoat buttoned tightly, Hastings at his side, holding an umbrella that proved futile against the deluge. They made their way to the orchard, where the body had been discovered, the ground now a quagmire of mud and fallen apples that squelched underfoot. Lantern in hand, Poirot knelt once more, his patent leather shoes sinking slightly into the sodden earth, to examine the site anew. Amid the debris, he unearthed a discarded letter fragment, sodden but legible under the lantern's glow. Addressed to Squire Harold Beaumont, its contents a terse demand for payment to silence knowledge of embezzled funds from his estate accounts. "Voilà, mon ami," Poirot exclaimed, his eyes alight with discovery. A clue physical, yet laced with motive. This missive, intercepted by Mademoiselle Thorne, no doubt. The timeline, that intricate web of hours and minutes, now revealed inconsistencies under Poirot's scrutiny. Squire Beaumont had claimed to be ensconced in his manor at noon, poring over ledgers, yet a witness, a passing milkmaid, placed him near the post office at 11:45, his portly figure glimpsed through the fog, hastening away with a parcel under his arm. A discrepancy, Hastings. Her past as a music hall singer, fleeing the scandal of a tarnished reputation in London's glittering yet unforgiving circles. "She knew my secret, monsieur," Slade admitted in her velvet-toned voice, a trace of cosmopolitan accent lingering. "Letters from old acquaintances. Agatha intercepted them, or so I suspected. But I bore her no ill will. Secrets are burdens we all carry." Her alibi, however, remained nebulous. Alone in her cottage during the critical hour, knitting by the fire. Unverifiable, save for the testimony of solitude. Poirot probed gently, noting the psychological profile. A woman of resilience, her mysteries a shield rather than a sword. Yet the red herring of the cloaked figure loomed, whispers linking her outsider status to spectral apparitions. As the clock struck 9, the storm abated to a drizzle, leaving the village steeped in a hush broken only by the drip from eaves. Poirot retreated to his lodgings at the local inn, Hastings in tow, his mind a cauldron of simmering deductions. The shadows of envy cast by Mrs. Pembroke, the timeline glitches implicating the squire, the veiled motives of Miss Slade, all intertwined with the physical remnants, the bruised neck, the bitten apple laced with cyanide's whisper, the torn emerald silk that now pointed tentatively toward another's wardrobe. "It is the human heart, mon ami," Poirot murmured as they ascended the creaking stairs, "where envy festers like rot in the orchard's fruit. But order shall prevail." The night deepened, veiling Juniper Orchard in enigma, yet the little Belgian's grey cells illuminated paths unseen, drawing ever closer to the core of deception. Chapter 6. The Web of Deceit Tightens. The following morning dawned with a reluctant pallor over Juniper Orchard, the previous night's storm having scoured the landscape clean, leaving behind a crisp autumnal clarity that belied the miasma of suspicion enveloping the village. Droplets glistened like jewels on the gnarled branches of the apple trees, and the river Juniper murmured with renewed vigour, its waters swollen from the deluge. Yet the air retained a chill, not merely from the season's advance, but from the intangible frost of dread that had settled upon the inhabitants. The post office, now cordoned with makeshift barriers of twine and guarded by the ever-befuddled Constable Perkins, web of deceit it tightens, each thread a motive, each knot a clue. Observe how they interact, the psychology. It will reveal much. Hastings, his fair hair ruffled by the breeze, nodded with his customary bluff enthusiasm. "Right you are, Poirot. These villagers, shifty lot if you ask me. That doctor with his trembling hands, the schoolmarm with her sour looks, someone's bound to crack." The hall, usually reserved for fêtes and parish meetings, now echoed with the murmur of assembled suspects, their faces a mosaic of apprehension under the watery light filtering through leaded windows. Dr. Reginald Hawthorne occupied a chair near the hearth, his burly frame hunched, spectacles fogged from the warmth of a hastily kindled fire. Mrs. Eliza Pembroke perched rigidly on a bench, her gaunt features set in a mask of disdain, while young Timothy Lark paced near the door, his lanky limbs betraying restless energy. Squire Harold Beaumont dominated the centre, his portly girth sprawled in an armchair, booming occasional platitudes to assert his authority. Miss Victoria Slade lingered at the periphery, her raven tresses framing a composure that seemed almost ethereal, her almond-shaped eyes scanning the room with subtle vigilance. Poirot entered with the flair of a maestro, his green eyes piercing each in turn as he positioned himself at the head of the room, Hastings flanking him like a loyal adjutant. "Mesdames et messieurs," he intoned, his voice a velvet cadence that commanded silence. "Hercule Poirot thanks you for your presence. The murder of Mademoiselle Agatha Thorne. It is a tapestry woven with threads of human frailty. Greed, envy, revenge. We shall examine these threads together." A collective intake of breath rippled through the assembly, the word murder hanging like a guillotine blade. Physical clues mounted as Poirot unveiled his findings, his small hands gesturing with eloquent precision. From his pocket, he produced the torn scrap of emerald silk, holding it aloft like a talisman. "This fabric, mes amis, ripped in the post office struggle. It matches, does it not, the hue of a dress belonging to Madame Pembroke?" The schoolmistress's scowl deepened into a grimace, her voice rising in protest. "That dress was stolen from my line 2 nights prior. I reported it to Perkins." Deepened the intrigue, Poirot's little grey cells dissecting the facades with surgical acuity. Timothy Lark's ambition, that fervent dream of escaping the village's bucolic confines, masked a profound insecurity. A youth orphaned young, reliant on Miss Thorne's benevolence, now twisted into potential betrayal. "Monsieur Lark," Poirot murmured, "your inheritance, it whispers of opportunity, no? Yet, your eyes, they dart like a cornered fox." The lad flushed, his earnest green gaze faltering. Squire Beaumont's bluster, that booming veneer of rural pomposity, concealed a cowardice born of financial ruin. The letter fragment demanding silence over embezzled funds loomed large. "Squire, your timeline, it crumbles like autumn leaves. Witnessed near the post office at 11:45, yet you claim seclusion at home." Beaumont puffed indignantly, his florid face reddening, but his evasion rang hollow. Miss Slade, with her enigmatic poise, offered a contrast, her psychological profile one of resilience forged in the crucibles of scandal, yet her unverifiable alibi invited suspicion. "Mademoiselle," Poirot pressed, "your secrets from London, they burden you, perhaps enough to silence one who knew." She met his gaze steadily, her velvet voice unwavering. "Secrets are chains, monsieur, but murder breaks them not." Amid these revelations, a misdirection emerged from the villagers' superstitious underbelly. Rumours of a ghostly postmistress, her spectral form glimpsed in the fog-shrouded orchard, lavender-scented and wailing for justice. An elderly crone, hovering at the hall's fringes, whispered of apparitions, diverting attention from human malice to ethereal fancy. Poirot dismissed it with a wave, though noting its utility as a red herring, sown perhaps by the culpable to muddy the investigative waters. As tensions simmered, Poirot retreated momentarily to ponder the bitten apple, that enigmatic fruit clutched in the victim's rigid grasp. In his mind's laboratory, tests unfolded, imagined with the precision of empirical science, suggesting cyanide, its almond bitterness masked by the overpowering lavender sprayed at the scene. The poison, it subdues. Boot prints, admitted to a detour through the mud, but for medicinal herbs, a flimsy excuse that crumbled under Poirot's gaze. By midday, as the sun pierced the clouds in fleeting benevolence, the hall thrummed with the electricity of revelation. Motives intertwined like the ivy's grip on the post office walls. Hawthorne's debts, Pembroke's envy, Lark's ambition, Beaumont's greed, Slade's secrets, all converging on the vanished postmistress's trove of knowledge. Poirot paced, his diminutive form casting a long shadow, his mind a vortex of symmetry seeking order amid chaos. The deceit, it is a web, yes, but spiders leave trails. We follow them to the centre. Hastings, ever the foil, interjected. "Blimey, Poirot, it's like herding cats. Everyone's got a skeleton in the cupboard." Yet, as the session adjourned for luncheon, a subtle shift occurred, the suspects' interactions betraying alliances and animosities. Mrs. Pembroke whispered to Timothy, her scowl softening in shared resentment. The squire blustered at Slade, his avarice eyeing her modest inheritance. Poirot observed from afar, his green eyes alight. The web of deceit, indeed, tightened, each strand pulling the guilty closer to the inexorable grasp of justice. The afternoon promised further unravelling, but for now, Juniper Orchard held its breath, the orchard's whispering secrets only the little Belgian could decipher. Chapter 7. Revelations in the Rain. As the midday sun yielded to gathering thunderheads, the skies over Juniper Orchard darkened with portentous swiftness, unleashing a torrential downpour that transformed the cobblestone lanes into glistening rivulets, and the orchards into sodden quagmires. Rain lashed against the village hall's leaded windows with the fury of an avenging spirit, each droplet a percussive accusation echoing the tensions within. The assembled suspects, dismissed momentarily for a luncheon of cold meats and ale at the adjacent inn, reconvened under Hercule Poirot's summons, their faces etched with the weariness of scrutiny and the damp chill that seeped through every crevice. The air hummed with the electric charge of impending revelation, the storm outside mirroring the tempest of emotions churning in the hearts of those entangled in Miss Agatha Thorne's demise. Squire Harold Beaumont, whose portly form slumped in his armchair, his florid countenance beaded with perspiration despite the chill. The squire's tweeds were sodden from a brief foray outside, and his bristling moustache quivered with indignation, or perhaps fear. Physically imposing, yet psychologically brittle, Beaumont's avarice for land had long defined him, a greed that gnawed at his estates like a voracious blight, compelling him to dubious schemes in these lean economic times. "Squire," Poirot intoned, producing the sodden letter fragment with a flourish. "This missive, addressed to you, demands payment for silence over embezzled funds. Mademoiselle Thorne, she possessed evidence of your land fraud, no? Parcels of orchard acreage illicitly acquired, boundaries redrawn in shadow." Beaumont blustered, his booming voice cracking like thunder. Preposterous. That woman meddled where she oughtn't. Intercepting my correspondence, yes, but fraud? Mere speculation. Yet, under Poirot's unyielding gaze, the truth emerged. Miss Thorne had uncovered forged deeds in a parcel meant for the solicitors, threatening exposure that would ruin his holdings. His motive, greed intertwined with desperation, loomed large, a red herring no longer but a tangible thread in the web. As rain hammered the roof, Poirot pivoted to Dr. Reginald Hawthorne, the physician's burly frame shifting uneasily in his seat, his spectacles slipping down his bulbous nose. The doctor's hands, those instruments of healing now clenched in his lap, betrayed the tremors of his secret vice. Psychologically ensnared by the siren call of the gaming tables, Hawthorne's jovial exterior masked a vortex of debt and shame. "Doctor," Poirot murmured, his tone deceptively gentle, "you're your revenge. It simmers like a potion in your apothecary. Mademoiselle Thorne refused your advances, did she not? And in retribution, you threatened her reputation with whispers of indiscretion." Hawthorne's ruddy complexion drained to pallor, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Advances? A mere flirtation, monsieur. Spurned, yes, but murder? She held my debts over me, those cursed letters from creditors. Exposure would end my practice." The revelation cascaded forth. Miss Thorne, privy to his intercepted missives, had rebuffed his clumsy courtship and warned of revealing his financial ruin, fueling a motive of spurned affection late crucibles of scandal and loss. "Mademoiselle Slade," Poirot queried, his moustaches twitching with insight. "Your secret. It is not mere scandal from the music halls, but a bond of blood. Mademoiselle Thorne was your aunt, unbeknownst to the village, no? An inheritance concealed in letters from London." Slade's composure fractured momentarily, a tear tracing her porcelain cheek as she confessed, "Yes, monsieur. She was my mother's sister, estranged by family feuds. I came to Juniper Orchard seeking reconciliation, an inheritance promised in her will. But she rebuffed me, fearing scandal tainting her propriety. The motive shifted, not malice, but thwarted familial claim, dispelling suspicions of her outsider status. Yet, her unverifiable alibi lingered, a shadow not fully banished. Amid these unveilings, a red herring was decisively dispelled. The cloaked figure glimpsed fleeing the orchard, that spectral apparition fueling village superstitions, proved unrelated, a mere poacher, apprehended by Constable Perkins for snaring rabbits in the squire's woods. The old shepherd's testimony, embellished by fear and folklore, crumbled under Poirot's scrutiny. A phantom? Non, mes amis. A flesh and blood trespasser, his cloak muddied not by murder but by mischief. This misdirection, sown perhaps unwittingly, had diverted attention from the true culprit's human frailties, allowing the web to tighten undetected. The timeline, that intricate chronology of deception, refined itself under Poirot's relentless probing. Miss Thorne's vanishing pinpointed to 11:30, corroborated by a clockmaker's testimony of hearing the post office bell chime erratically at that hour. A struggle, perhaps, muffled by the fog. The body, dragged to the orchard post-mortem, suggested a killer of sufficient strength, ruling out the frailer suspects like Mrs. Pembroke, whose envy burned hot but whose physicality faltered. The poison administered in her tea, Poirot elucidated to Hastings in a hushed aside, weakening her for the strangulation. The apple, bitten as a taunt or to simulate natural demise. Cyanide's characteristic bluntness. Dash it, Poirot. It's like peeling an onion. Layers upon layers of rot. Greed, revenge, secrets, all pointing fingers at one another. The Belgian nodded, his egg-shaped head tilting in contemplation. Précisément, mon ami. But the rain, it washes away illusions, revealing the truth beneath. We approach the core, the one whose motive aligns with method, whose psychology betrays the fatal flaw. By late afternoon, as the downpour eased to a drizzle, the hall emptied once more, the suspects departing with weighted steps, their hidden motives laid bare like exposed roots after the flood. Poirot retreated to the inn, Hastings in tow, the storm's revelations echoing in his mind. The vanishing postmistress's enigma deepened, yet clarity emerged. Miss Thorne's death, a confluence of poisons both chemical and emotional, orchestrated by a hand intimate with her world. The rain had unveiled much, but the final thunderclap of justice loomed on the horizon, ready to strike the guilty amid Juniper Orchard's sodden serenity. Chapter 8. The Grey Cells Stir. As the afternoon waned into a muted twilight, the storm's remnants lingered over Juniper Orchard like a reluctant spectre, the skies bruised with lingering clouds that wept sporadic tears upon the thatched roofs and sodden earth. The village, steeped in the aftermath of revelations, seemed to hold its collective breath, the orchards whispering secrets to the wind as leaves rustled in conspiratorial murmurs. Hercule Poirot, having adjourned the gathering at the village hall with a promise of further elucidation, retreated to his temporary lodgings at the Rose and Crown Inn, a quaint establishment with creaking floorboards and walls adorned with faded tapestries depicting bucolic scenes that now appeared ironically serene. Captain Arthur Hastings accompanied him, his military stride contrasting Poirot's more deliberate gait, the pair navigating the puddled lanes under the shelter of a shared umbrella that Hastings valiantly wielded against the drizzle. The inn's parlour, a cosy enclave redolent with the aroma of pipe tobacco and beeswax polish, provided a sanctuary from the elements. A fire crackled in the grate, casting flickering shadows that danced across the oak-panelled walls, while a grandfather clock ticked with richness of his Belgian heritage. It is in these moments of repose that the little grey cells stir most vigorously. The enigma of Mademoiselle Thorne's demise, it is a mosaic of deception, each piece a fragment of human frailty. We must contemplate the psychology, for it is the soul that betrays where the body conceals. Hastings sipped his brandy, his brow furrowed in that endearing English perplexity that so often served as foil to Poirot's continental acuity. Dash it all, Poirot, you've got me stumped. Greed from the squire, revenge from the doctor, envy from the schoolmarm. It's a veritable nest of vipers. And that young lark chap with his shifty eyes. How do you sort the wheat from the chaff? Poirot leaned forward, his green eyes sparkling with the intensity of intellectual pursuit, as if the fire's embers reflected the blaze within his mind. Ah, but consider, mon ami, the one who feigns least often hides most. The bluster of Squire Beaumont, it is a shield for cowardice. The tremors of Dr. Hawthorne, a confession of vice. Yet, the true culprit lurks in the subtleties, the inconsistencies that whisper rather than shout. He gestured with his small manicured hand as if conducting an invisible orchestra of clues. The clues converged in his thoughts like tributaries feeding a mighty river. The lavender perfume, applied in overdose at the post office, its cloying intensity designed to mask the almond bitterness of cyanide's insidious breath. The footprints, too pristinely imprinted upon the dusty floor, suggesting not a spontaneous struggle, but a deliberate planting to implicate another. Outside, the rain pattered against the window panes, a rhythmic accompaniment to Poirot's ruminations. He rose abruptly, pacing the parlour with measured steps, his egg-shaped head tilted in contemplation. The method, Hastings, it is twofold. Poison to weaken, strangulation to silence. Cyanide in the tea, administered by one familiar with her habits, the midday cup, steeped precisely at 11. The bitten apple, clutched in her hand, a macabre flourish, perhaps to suggest self-inflicted folly or a taunt from the killer. Hastings interjected, his voice tinged with horror. Beastly business, that. And the silk scarf implied in the bruises, emerald green, matching the taunt. Forged, then, to frame her? Non, mon ami. Genuine, yet misdirected. Poirot's moustaches quivered with the thrill of breakthrough. The letter, ostensibly to Squire Beaumont, revealed upon closer inspection a subtlety. The address partially obscured, but the phrasing echoed grievances Mrs. Pembroke had voiced against Miss Thorne herself. Meddling in village affairs, hoarding secrets like a miser, It is a missive intended for the postmistress, perhaps a threat born of envy, but intercepted and repurposed by the killer to sow discord. The psychology betrays. Madame Pembroke's bitterness is vocal, overt, a red herring, while the true deceiver operates in shadows. As twilight deepened, the parlour's atmosphere grew thicker, the fire's warmth a counterpoint to the chill of deduction. Poirot resumed his seat, sipping the brandy with deliberate savour, his mind a whirlwind of synthesis. Timothy Lark's ambition, that fervent yearning for escape, intertwined with his access to the post office, delivering parcels, sorting mail, privy to the cyanide's procurement, perhaps, through Dr. Hawthorne's apothecary under guise of errands. Miss Slade's familial secret, unveiled as aunt and niece, added a layer of inheritance motive, yet her poise suggested innocence, her alibi's nebulosity, a mere smokescreen of circumstance. The cloaked poacher, dispelled as irrelevant, had served its purpose in diverting the villagers' superstitions, allowing the culprit to maneuver undetected. Hastings, warming to the discourse, ventured a hypothesis. What about the squire's timeline glitch? Spotted near the post office, then vanishing like a ghost. And his greed, land disputes with Thorne over orchard boundaries. Poirot nodded approvingly. Bien, Hastings, you progress. The squire's avarice is palpable, but his portly frame ill-suited to dragging a body through mud without trace. No, the killer is agile, intimate, perhaps one who cycles the paths daily, footprints muddied by routine. The implication hung unspoken. Young Lark, his lanky youth belying a cunning born of desperation. A knock at the door interrupted their colloquy. The innkeeper, bearing a telegram dispatched urgently from London. Poirot unfolded it with eager fingers, his eyes scanning the missive from a graphological expert he had consulted via wire. Confirmation. The letter truths shall unfurl like petals in the sun. The lavender's overdose, the planted prints, the forged intent, all converge upon the one whose psychology feigns simplicity. Hastings, his brandy depleted, yawned expansively. Righto, Poirot, sleep on it, eh? The grey cells need their rest too. Yet, as Hastings retired to his chamber, Poirot remained by the fire, gazing into the embers where visions of clues danced like fireflies. The vanishing postmistress's enigma, once shrouded in fog, now clarified under his mental lens. Motives of money, revenge, and secrets interwoven with physical evidence that pointed inexorably to betrayal from within. The storm had passed, but revelations stirred anew, the little Belgian's mind a bastion of order amid the chaos of human passions. Juniper Orchard slumbered uneasily, unaware that dawn would bring the tightening noose of justice, courtesy of Hercule Poirot's unerring grey cells. Chapter 9. Gathering Storm of Accusations. The morrow dawned upon Juniper Orchard with a deceptive serenity, the storm's fury having abated to leave behind a sky of limpid blue, streaked with wisps of cloud that drifted lazily like forgotten suspicions. Yet, beneath this azure canopy, a tempest of human passions brewed, ready to erupt in the confines of the village hall. The air carried the crisp tang of autumn, redolent with the scent of damp earth and bruised apples from the orchards, where the trees stood sentinel, their boughs heavy with fruit that mirrored the weight of unspoken accusations. Hercule Poirot, having fortified himself with a tisane of herbal infusion at the inn, eschewing the robust English tea that so offended his delicate constitution, proceeded to the hall with Captain Hastings in tow. The Belgian's patent leather shoes navigated the residual puddles with meticulous care, his moustaches waxed to impeccable curls, his green eyes alight with the anticipation of confrontation. The village hall, with its timbered rafters and flagstone floor still bearing the faint dampness of the previous deluge, hummed with the murmur of reconvened suspects, their presences summoned by Poirot's imperative missive, dispatched via the bumbling Constable Perkins. The assembly formed a tableau of unease. Dr. Reginald Hawthorne, his burly frame wedged into a wooden chair, fiddled nervously with his framing almond-shaped eyes that held the inscrutable calm of distant horizons. Poirot entered with the quiet authority of a conductor ascending the podium, his diminutive stature belying the commanding presence that silenced the room. Hastings positioned himself discreetly by the door, his military bearing a silent sentinel. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot intoned, his voice a silken thread weaving through the charged atmosphere. "We gather once more amid the gathering storm of accusations. The murder of Mademoiselle Agatha Thorne. It is not a mere vanishing, but a calculated extinction of life, orchestrated with poison and ligature. The clues, they converge, the motives, they clash. Let us permit the tongues to wag, for in accusation lies revelation." No sooner had the words escaped his lips than the hall erupted in a cacophony of recriminations, the suspect's pent-up suspicions bursting forth like floodwaters breaching a dam. Timothy Lark, his ambitious streak fueling a desperate deflection, pointed a trembling finger at Squire Beaumont. "It's him, sir. The squire. He argued with Miss Thorne over those land parcels. I heard 'em myself, voices raised in the post office last week. And that letter fragment? All about his embezzling, greed's his motive, plain as day." The youth's voice cracked with feigned conviction, his psychological insecurity manifesting as aggressive posturing, a bid to divert the gaze from his own shadowed ambitions. Beaumont rose with ponderous fury, his chair scraping against the flagstones, his moustache bristling like a hedge in gale. "Insolent whelp! You dare accuse me? That postboy's the one with sticky fingers, embezzling postal funds, I'll wager. Miss Thorne promised him an inheritance. Perhaps he hastened it along with that cyanide apple." His booming timbre reverberated off the rafters, his avarice twisting into defensive bluster, yet his eyes betrayed a flicker of cowardice, the psychological armour cracking under scrutiny. Miss Victoria Slade, her velvet voice cutting through the din with refined sharpness, directed her almond gaze toward Dr. Hawthorne. "And what of the doctor? His hands tremble like a man with secrets, debts from gambling, spurned advances on Agatha. Who better to procure poison than a physician? I saw him lurking near the orchard path that morning, indignation, his psychological entrapment in vice fueling a desperate counterattack. The doctor's gentle hands now clenched into fists that betrayed his inner chaos." Mrs. Pembroke, her scowl deepening into a grotesque rictus, joined the fray, her envious soul revelling in the chaos. "All of you hypocrites! The squire's greed, the doctor's lechery, but what of the boy? Timothy, always sniffing about the post office, eyes on her brooch and baubles. Envy's not mine alone." Her words, spat with the venom of repressed bitterness, circled back to her own slights, her gaunt frame quivering as if the storm outside had migrated inward. Poirot, observing the maelstrom with detached acuity, raised a small hand, his voice commanding silence like a maestro's baton. "Enough. This storm of accusations. It illuminates, yes, but also obscures. Hercule Poirot shall reveal the inconsistencies that pierce the veil." He paced deliberately, his green eyes fixing each suspect in turn, his little grey cells synthesizing the barrage into coherent threads. "Dr. Hawthorne, your alibi, it crumbles like pastry. You claim a house call at 11:30, yet a patient, the widow Granger, attests you were absent, your surgery deserted. Where, then, were you in that fateful half-hour?" Hawthorne stammered, his burly form deflating. A detour, monsieur, for supplies, nothing more." But the lie hung palpably, his psychological facade fracturing under the weight of exposed deceit. Yet, as the accusations peaked, a pinnacle of misdirection unfolded with theatrical precision. Constable Perkins, summoned earlier by Poirot's discreet instruction, entered the hall bearing a small evidence pouch. "Found this, sir, in young Lark's pocket during a routine search of his lodgings." From the pouch emerged Miss Thorne's antique silver brooch, its intricate filigree glinting accusingly in the light filtering through the windows. A gasp rippled through the assembly. Timothy's face blanched, his lanky frame staggering as if struck. "Planted! I swear it! I've never seen that before," he cried, his earnest eyes wide with feigned or genuine terror, his ambitious dreams crumbling into desperation. Poirot examined the brooch with meticulous care, his stolen dress, Yet the tear, it is deliberate, fibres aligned too neatly for struggle. The footprints, muddied with intent, the lavender sprayed to conceal cyanide's almond whisper. These are not accidents, but artistry of deception. Hastings, from his vantage, murmured to himself, "By Jove, Poirot's got them squirming, but who's the spider in this web?" The Belgian, as if sensing his companion's thoughts, straightened, his voice a crescendo. "The accusations fly like arrows in the gale, but truth, it is the anchor. We approach the denouement, where motives and methods align in symmetry." As the session drew to a close, the suspects dispersed into the rain-lashed afternoon, their faces storm-tossed masks of apprehension. Timothy Lark lingered, his pocket now lightened of the incriminating brooch, yet burdened by suspicion. Hawthorne slunk away, his alibi in tatters, the others scattered like leaves in the wind. Poirot, with Hastings at his side, gazed out at the deluge. "The gathering storm, mon ami. It breaks soon. The misdirection peaks, but the grey cells they penetrate." The village hall emptied, leaving echoes of accusations that reverberated into the encroaching dusk. Juniper Orchard poised on the precipice of revelation, the vanishing postmistress's enigma drawing inexorably toward its climactic unravelling. Chapter 10. The Grand Deduction. As the gloaming deepened over Juniper Orchard, casting elongated shadows through the leaded windows of the village hall, a palpable tension enveloped the assembled company, thicker than the fog that had shrouded the fateful morning of Miss Agatha Thorne's vanishing. The storm of the previous days had subsided, leaving behind a crisp evening chill that seeped into the bones, mirroring the icy grip of anticipation that held each suspect in thrall. Lanterns flickered upon the oaken tables, their flames dancing like restless spirits, illuminating faces etched with apprehension, defiance, and the subtle masks of guilt. Hercule Poirot, the diminutive Belgian detective whose reputation for piercing the veils of deception preceded him across continents, stood at the head of the room, his egg-shaped head inclined at that characteristic angle, his magnificent moustaches quivering with the vibrancy of impending revelation. Eyes that now darted with the desperation of a cornered quarry. Squire Harold Beaumont, portly and florid, his tweed straining against his girth, his booming voice silenced for the moment by the gravity of the occasion. And Miss Victoria Slade, the enigmatic newcomer, her raven tresses framing almond-shaped eyes that held a poised detachment, her psychological resilience a shield against the encroaching storm of truth. Poirot paced the flagstone floor with deliberate steps, his patent leather shoes clicking like the inexorable ticking of a clock counting down to justice. The dimly lit hall, with its timbered rafters arching overhead like the ribs of some ancient beast, amplified his voice. A symphony of revelation, modulated with the precision of a maestro unveiling the crescendo of a masterpiece. "Mes amis," he commenced, his tone of velvet caress laced with steel. "We arrive at the denouement of this most perplexing affair. The vanishing of the postmistress of Juniper Orchard, it was no mere abduction, no whimsical flight into the mists. No, it was a meticulously orchestrated lure, a deception woven with threads of poison and strangulation, designed to confound and mislead. Mademoiselle Agatha Thorne, that paragon of propriety and guardian of secrets, met her end not in the orchard's embrace, but in the sanctity of her domain, felled by cyanide laced in her midday tea, her resistance masked by the cruel constriction of a silk ligature when the toxin alone proved insufficient. A collective gasp rippled through the assembly, the lantern's flames seeming to waver in sympathy. Poirot's green eyes, sharp as emeralds honed by intellect, pierced each face in turn, dissecting the psychological undercurrents with surgical acuity. "The culprit," he continued, his voice rising in dramatic cadence, is one who knew her habits intimately, the precise hour of her tea, the lavender sachet she favoured, the ledger of village confidences she maintained with unerring diligence. Access, motive, and opportunity converge upon this individual, their psychology a labyrinth of calculation concealed beneath a facade of simplicity. He halted before Mrs. Pembroke, whose gaunt frame quivered imperceptibly the snares of vice. "The footprints, Doctor, those broader impressions upon the dusty floor, they align with your sturdy boots muddied deliberately to implicate. You were accomplice only in debt. Your gambling woes a lever by which the true killer manipulated you, perhaps procuring the cyanide from your apothecary under guise of medical necessity." Hawthorne's hands trembled, his spectacles fogging as he stammered. I supplied nothing knowingly. My advances spurned, my secrets held, yes, but complicity? Monstrous. Poirot nodded, his voice gentle yet unyielding. Your role was peripheral, Doctor, a red herring in this web of deceit. The Belgian pivoted with theatrical poise, his attention now fixed upon Timothy Lark, the young postboy whose lanky form seemed to shrink under the weight of scrutiny. The lad's earnest green eyes widened, his ambitious dreams crumbling like autumn leaves underfoot. "No, the mastermind is you, Monsieur Timothy Lark, the one whose youth belies a cunning forged in the fires of desperation." A stunned silence descended, broken only by the distant patter of residual rain upon the roof. Timothy's face blanched, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Me? Sir, you're mistaken. I admired her." Poirot's voice swelled triumphantly, unravelling the tapestry with inexorable logic. "Motive, mon ami. It is not mere inheritance, that small bequest whispered in her will, but revenge, pure and vengeful. Mademoiselle Thorne discovered your embezzlement of postal funds, small sums siphoned to fuel your ambitions of escaping this bucolic prison, dreams of city lights and grander horizons. She threatened exposure, jail, ruin. Thus, you laced her tea with cyanide, procured through Dr. Hawthorne's unwitting aid, timing it for her habitual sip at 11:30. When the poison weakened but did not fell her swiftly, you resorted to strangulation with the emerald silk scarf, torn from Mrs. Pembroke's dress in premeditated theft, staging the vanishing to suggest abduction. The assembly leaned forward, transfixed, as Poirot elaborated the intricacies. The apple, bitten and clutched in her rigid grasp. A final taunt, monsieur, administered by you to implicate poison alone, perhaps as a nod to the orchard's bounty, or a macabre jest at her expense. The psychology of remorse and rationalization, justice's inexorable tide washing away the remnants of denial. Constable Perkins stepped forward, his lanky form assuming unaccustomed authority, cuffing the youth with solemn efficiency as the villagers murmured in shocked vindication. Poirot straightened, satisfaction gleaming in his eyes, order restored to the chaos of human folly. Thus, mes amis, the little grey cells prevail. Motives of money, revenge, and secrets entwine, but truth, it is symmetrical, unyielding. The hall emptied gradually, the suspects dispersing into the twilight, Hawthorne with bowed head, Pembroke with a flicker of reluctant relief, Beaumont blustering about efficiency restored, Slade gliding away with enigmatic grace. Hastings clapped Poirot on the shoulder, his voice hearty. "Brilliant as ever, old chap. Another puzzle neatly tied." As the lanterns dimmed and the echoes faded, the mystery of the vanishing postmistress dissolved into the annals of Juniper Orchard's lore, a cautionary tale of hidden malice amid idyllic serenity. Dear listener, thus concludes our tale of deception and deduction in the shadowed lanes of Juniper Orchard. If the twists have ignited the spark of your own little grey cells, do subscribe to the Hercule Poirot Story Podcast for more enigmas of the human heart. Share your suspicions in the comments below, and until our next rendezvous with mystery, farewell.